On the Soul and the Resurrection by Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Part 9. "But," said I, "what help can one find in this devout hope, when one considers the greatness of the evil in undergoing torture even for a single year? And if that intolerable anguish be prolonged for the interval of an age, what grain of comfort is left from any subsequent expectation to him whose purgation is thus commensurate with an entire age? Why, either we must plan to keep the soul absolutely untouched and free from any stain of evil, or, if our passionate nature makes that quite impossible, then we must plan that our failures in excellence consist only in mild and easily curable derelictions. For the gospel in its teaching distinguishes between a debtor of 10,000 talents and a debtor of 500 pence, and of 50 pence, and of a farthing, which is the uttermost of coins. It proclaims that God's just judgment reaches to all, and enhances the payment necessary as the weight of the debt increases, and on the other hand does not overlook the very smallest debts. But the gospel tells us that this payment of debts was not effected by the refunding of money, but that the indebted man was delivered to the tormentors until he should pay the whole debt. And that means nothing else than paying in the coin of torment the inevitable recompense. The recompense, I mean, that consists in taking the share of pain incurred during his lifetime, when he inconsiderately chose mere pleasure, undiluted with its opposite, so that, having put off from him all that foreign growth which sin is, and discarded the shame of any debts, he might stand in liberty and fearlessness. Now, liberty is the coming up to a state which owns no master and is self-regulating. It is that with which we were gifted by God at the beginning, but which has been obscured by the feeling of shame arising from indebtedness. Liberty, too, is in all cases one and the same, essentially. It has a natural attraction to itself. It follows, then, that as everything that is free will be united with its like, and as virtue is a thing that has no master, that is free, everything that is free will be united with virtue. But further, the divine being is the fountain of all virtue. Therefore those who have parted with evil will be united with him. And so, as the Apostle says, God will be all in all. For this utterance seems to me plainly to confirm the opinion we have already arrived at, for it means that God will be instead of all other things, and in all. For while our present life is active among a variety of multiform conditions, and the things we have relations with are numerous, for instance, time, air, locality, food and drink, clothing, sunlight, lamplight, and other necessities of life, none of which, many though they be, are God, that blessed state which we hope for is in need of none of these things, but the divine being will become all, and instead of all, to us, distributing himself proportionately to every need of that existence. It is plain, too, from Holy Scripture, that God becomes to those who deserve it locality and home and clothing and food and drink and light and riches and dominion and everything thinkable and nameable that goes to make our life happy. But he that becomes all things will be in all things too, and herein it appears to me that Scripture teaches the complete annihilation of evil. If that is, God will be in all existing things, evil plainly will not then be among them. For if anyone was to assume that it did exist, then how will the belief that God will be in all be kept intact? The accepting of that one thing, evil, mars the comprehensiveness of the term all. But he that will be in all will never be in that which does not exist. What then, I asked, are we to say to those whose hearts fail at these calamities? We will say to them, replied the teacher, this: it is foolish, good people, for you to fret and complain of the chain of this fixed sequence of life's realities. You do not know the goal towards which each single dispensation of the universe is moving. You do not know that all things have to be assimilated to the divine nature in accordance with the artistic plan of their author, in a certain regularity and order. Indeed, it was for this that intelligent beings came into existence, namely, that the riches of the divine blessings should not lie idle. The all-creating wisdom fashioned these souls, these receptacles with free wills, these vessels, as it were, for this very purpose, that there should be some capacities able to receive his blessings and become continually larger with the inpouring of the stream. Such are the wonders that the participation in the divine blessings works. It makes him into whom they come larger and more capacious. From his capacity to receive, it gets for the receiver an actual increase in bulk as well, and he never stops enlarging. The fountain of blessings wells up unceasingly, and the partaker's nature, finding nothing superfluous and without a use in that which it receives, makes the whole influx an enlargement of its own proportions, and becomes at once more wishful to imbibe the nobler nourishment, and more capable of containing it. Each grows along with each, both the capacity which is nursed in such abundance of blessings and so grows greater, and the nurturing supply, which comes on in a flood, answering to the growth of those increasing powers. It is likely, therefore, that this bulk will mount to such a magnitude as there is no limit to check, so that we should not grow into it. With such a prospect before us, are you angry that our nature is advancing towards its goal along the path appointed for it? Why, our career cannot run there except that which weighs us down. I mean, this encumbering load of earthiness be shaken off the soul. Nor can we be domiciled in purity with the corresponding part of our nature unless we have cleansed ourselves by a better training from the habit of affection which we have contracted in life toward this earthiness. But if there be in you any clinging to this body, and the being unlocked from this darling thing give you pain, let not this either make you despair. You will behold this bodily envelopment which is now dissolved in death, woven again out of the same atoms. Not indeed into this organization with its gross and heavy texture, but with its threads worked up into something more subtle and ethereal, so that you will not only have near you that which you love, but it will be restored to you with a brighter and more entrancing beauty. But it somehow seems to me now, I said, that the doctrine of the resurrection necessarily comes on for our discussion. A doctrine which I think is, even at first sight, true as well as credible, as it is told us in Scripture. so that that will not come in question between us. But since the weakness of the human understanding is strengthened still farther by any arguments that are intelligible to us, it would be well not to leave this part of the subject either without philosophical examination. Let us consider then what ought to be said about it. As for the thinkers, the teacher went on, outside our own system of thought, they have, with all their diverse ways of looking at things, one in one point, another in another, approached and touched the doctrine of the resurrection. While they none of them exactly coincide with us, they have in no case wholly abandoned such an expectation. Some indeed make human nature vile in their comprehensiveness, maintaining that a soul becomes alternately that of a man and of something irrational, that it transmigrates into various bodies, changing at pleasure from the man into fowl, fish, or beast, and then returning to humankind. While some extend this absurdity even to trees and shrubs, so that they consider their wooden life as corresponding and akin to humanity. Others of them hold only thus much, that the soul exchanges one man for another man, so that the life of humanity is continued always by means of the same souls, which being exactly the same in number, are being born perpetually, first into one generation and then into another. As for ourselves, we take our stand upon the tenets of the Church, and assert that it will be well to accept only so much of these speculations as is sufficient to show that those who indulge in them are to a certain extent in accord with the doctrine of the resurrection. Their statement, for instance, that the soul after its release from this body insinuates itself into other bodies is not absolutely out of harmony with the revival which we hope for. For our view, which maintains that the body, both now and again in the future, is composed of the atoms of the universe, is held equally by these heathens. In fact, you cannot imagine any constitution of the body independent of a concourse of these atoms. But the divergence lies in this. We assert that the same body again as before, composed of the same atoms, is compacted around the soul. They suppose that the soul alights on other bodies, not only rational, but irrational, and even insensate. And while all are agreed that these bodies which the soul resumes derive their substance from the atoms of the universe, they part company from us in thinking that they are not made out of identically the same atoms as those which in this mortal life grew around the soul. Let, then, this external testimony stand for the fact that it is not contrary to probability that the soul should again inhabit a body. After that, however, it is incumbent upon us to make a survey of the inconsistencies of their position, and it will be easy thus, by means of the consequences that arise as we follow out the consistent view, to bring the truth to light. What, then, is to be said about these theories? This, that those who would have it that the soul migrates into natures divergent from each other, seems to me to obliterate all natural distinctions, to blend and confuse together in every possible respect the rational, the irrational, the sentient, and the insensate. If, that is, all these are to pass into each other, with no distinct natural order secluding them from mutual transition. To say that one and the same soul, on account of a particular environment of body, is at one time a rational and intellectual soul, and that then it is caverned along with the reptiles, or herds with the birds, or is a beast of burden, or a carnivorous one, or swims in the deep, or even drops down to an insensate thing, so as to strike out roots or become a complete tree, producing buds on branches, and from those buds a flower or a thorn, or a fruit edible or noxious. To say this is nothing short of making all things the same, and believing that one single nature runs through all beings, that there is a connection between them which blends and confuses hopelessly all the marks by which one could be distinguished from another. The philosopher, who asserts that the same thing may be born in anything, intends no less than that all things are to be one. When the observed differences in things are for him no obstacle to mixing together things which are utterly incongruous, he makes it necessary that even when one sees one of the creatures that are venom-darting or carnivorous, one should regard it, in spite of appearances, as of the same tribe, nay, even of the same family, as oneself. With such beliefs, a man will look upon even hemlock as not alien to his own nature, detecting as he does humanity in the plant. The bunch of grapes itself, produced though it be by cultivation for the purpose of sustaining life, he will not regard without suspicion, for it too comes from a plant. And we find that even the fruit of the ears of grain upon which we live are plants. How then can one put in the sickle to cut them down? And how can one squeeze the bunch, or pull up the thistle from the field, or gather flowers, or hunt birds, or set fire to the logs of the funeral pyre? It being all the while uncertain whether we are not laying violent hands on our kinsmen or ancestors or fellow countrymen, and whether it is not through the medium of some body of theirs that the fire is being kindled, and the cup mixed, and the food prepared. To think that in the case of any single one of these things, a soul of a man has become a plant or animal, while no marks are stamped upon them to indicate what sort of plant or animal it is that has been a man, and what sort has sprung from other beginnings, such a conception as this will dispose him who has entertained it to feel an equal amount of interest in everything. He must, perforce, either harden himself against actual human beings who are in the land of the living, or, if his nature inclines him to love his kindred, he will feel alike towards every kind of life, whether he meet it in reptiles or in wild beasts. Why, if the holder of such an opinion go into a thicket of trees, even then he will regard the trees as a crowd of men. What sort of life will his be, when he has to be tender towards everything on the ground of kinship, or else hardened toward mankind on account of his seeing no difference between them and the other creatures? From what has already been said, then, we must reject this theory. And there are many other considerations as well, which on the grounds of mere consistency lead us away from it. For I have heard persons who hold these opinions saying that whole nations of souls are hidden away somewhere in a realm of their own, living a life analogous to that of the embodied souls. But such is the fineness and buoyancy of their substance that they themselves roll around with the revolution of the universe, and that these souls, having individually lost their wings through some gravitation toward evil, become embodied. First this takes place in men, and after that, passing from a human life, owing to brutish affinities in their passions, they are reduced to the level of brutes, and leaving that, drop down to this insensate life of pure nature, which you have been hearing so much of, so that that inherently fine and buoyant thing that the soul is first becomes weighted and downward tending in consequence of some vice, and so migrates to a human body. Then its reasoning powers are extinguished, and it goes on living in some brute. And then even this gift of sensation is withdrawn, and it changes into the insensate plant life. But after that mounts up again by the same gradations until it is restored to its place in heaven. Now, this doctrine will at once be found, even after a very cursory survey, to have no coherency within itself. For first, seeing that the soul is to be dragged down from its life in heaven on account of evil there to the condition of a tree, and is then from this point, on account of virtue exhibited there, to return to heaven, their theory will be unable to decide which is to have the preference, the life in heaven or the life in a tree. A circle, in fact, of the same sequences will be perpetually traversed, where the soul, at whatever point it may be, has no resting place. If it thus lapses from the disembodied state to the embodied, and thence to the insensate, and then springs back to the disembodied, an inextricable confusion of good and evil must result in the minds of those who thus teach. For the life in heaven will no more preserve its blessedness, since evil can touch heaven's denizens, then the life in trees will be devoid of virtue, since it is from this, they say, that the rebound of the soul toward the good begins, while from heaven it begins the evil life again. Secondly, seeing that the soul, as it moves round in heaven, is there entangled with evil, and in consequence is dragged down to live in mere matter, from whence, however, it is again lifted into its residence on high, it follows that those philosophers establish the very contrary of their own views. They establish, namely, that the life in matter is the purgation of evil, while that undeviating revolution along with the stars is the foundation and cause of evil in every soul. It is here that the soul, by means of virtue, grows its wings, and then soars upward. And it is there that those wings, by reason of evil, fall off, so that it descends and clings to this lower world, and is commingled with the grossness of material nature. But the untenableness of this view does not stop even in this, namely, that it contains assertions diametrically opposed to each other. Beyond this, their fundamental conception itself cannot stand secure on every side. They say, for instance, that a heavenly nature is unchangeable. How then can there be room for any weakness in the unchangeable? If again a lower nature is subject to infirmity, how, in the midst of this infirmity, can freedom from it be achieved? They attempt to amalgamate two things that can never be joined together. They descry strength in weakness, passionlessness in passion. But even to this last view they are not faithful throughout, for they bring home the soul from its material life to that very place whence they had exiled it because of evil there, as though the life in that place was quite safe and uncontaminated, apparently quite forgetting the fact that the soul was weighted with evil there, before it plunged down into this lower world. The blame thrown on the life here below, and the praise of the things in heaven, are thus interchanged and reversed. For that which was once blamed conducts, in their opinion, to the brighter life, while that which was taken for the better state gives an impulse to the soul's propensity to evil. Expel, therefore, from among the doctrines of the faith all erroneous and shifting suppositions about such matters. End of Part 9.